as she passed by behind him, talking as she went, not to him at all, but to Patrick's dad, about not forgetting to get the car serviced. Then she was out of the door and gone. Minutes later, Patrick was being hustled into the car, and his dad was telling him to be careful crossing the road by the school, to wait until the lollipop man said he could cross. This is what he said every morning. Patrick was dropped off by the bridge as usual, and found himself alone at last, and walking along the canal. Suddenly it didn't matter any more about Jimmy Rington, or the goal he'd let in, or saying whatever, or Mrs. Brightwell's volcanic temper tantrums. He breathed in the sweet and sour smell of the brown sauce factory. It was strange. He loved the smell, but hated the taste of the actual sauce. Shading his eyes against the sun, he looked up at the chimney to see if his kestrel was there. He wasn't, but Patrick didn't mind, because there were some ducks cruising past him, and another nearby with his bottom in the air, and that always made him smile. A moorhen scurried across the towpath in front of him and disappeared into the long grass. He hitched up his school bag and felt suddenly all bright and breezy, until he saw the swan some distance ahead of him, standing there in the towpath, looking at him, waiting for him. That worried him, because Patrick knew this swan, knew him all too well. They had met once before. It looked like the same one who'd blocked his path on the way to school only a couple of weeks ago. He'd come running at Patrick, wings outstretched, neck lowered to attack, and hissing like 100 snakes. Patrick had had to run into the undergrowth to escape him, and had fallen into a patch of nettles. So Patrick did not like this swan, not one bit. Yet somehow he was going to have to get past him. It was the only way to get to school, and he had to get to school. The question was, how to do it. Patrick stood there, eyeing the swan, just hoping that sooner rather than later the swan would decide it was time to go back into the water. But the swan stayed steadfastly where he was, glaring darkly at him, his great black feet planted firmly on the towpath. He was showing no signs of moving anywhere. Patrick was still wondering what to do, when out of the corner of his eye he saw something floating out in the middle of the canal. It was bright green and looked plastic, a sack of some kind. He probably wouldn't have paid it any more attention. A sack's not that interesting after all, if he hadn't heard the squeaking. It sounded as if it was coming from the sack itself, and that didn't make sense. Patrick thought at first it might have been the pipings of ducklings or moorhen chicks. He'd heard them often enough in the canal. But then he remembered that there weren't any chicks around, not any more, because it was autumn. The whole place was carpeted with yellow leaves, gold leaves, red leaves. They were all around his feet. Spring and summer were over. No, it really had to be the sack itself that was squeaking. It was still early in the morning, and Patrick's brain must have been working very slowly, because several moments passed before he realized that there was something alive inside the sack. And even then, it wasn't only the squeaking that convinced him. The sack, he noticed, wasn't just drifting gently along like everything else, the leaves, the sticks, all the other flotsam in the canal. It was turning of its own accord, as if it was being propelled from the inside. There was definitely something inside it, and whatever it was seemed to be struggling against the side of the plastic sack, kicking at it, trying to escape from it, and squeaking and squealing in terror. He had no idea what it might be, only that it was alive, and in danger of drowning. The canal wasn't that wide. It was dirty, but it wasn't wide. He could do it. Patrick didn't think about it anymore. He shrugged off his school bag and leapt into the canal. He knew he was a good enough swimmer, so he wasn't worried about drowning, only about getting cold and wet. He didn't want the canal water in his mouth either, so he kept it tight shut. Just a few quick strokes out into the canal, and he'd grabbed the sack, turned, and was swimming back again. Suddenly, the bank seemed a long way away, but he got there. Climbing out was the most difficult part, because his clothes were heavy and clinging, and the sack was slippery in his hands, difficult to hold on to. He felt suddenly very weak, felt the cold of the water chilling him to the bone. But with one huge effort, he heaved himself up, enough to hook one leg up onto the bank, and then he was out. Standing there, dripping from everywhere, he